All right, my talk is entitled C Creativity, and the subtitle is Cultural Creativity, or Why Is There No Middle C? This is not about music, by the way, in case you're wondering. I'm not going to talk about my work explicitly except to say that you can go to nickim.com and there's plenty of it available for you to look at, and if you want to talk about it over lunch or send me an email, I'd be glad to do that. Let me ask, though, before I start talking about the very general, the very specific, and things in the middle, how many people are pretty conversant with, familiar, able to have a conversation, understanding of, say, linguistics, computational linguistics? Genuine question that you can, there's more than that, I know. I mean, it's really, I know, we had like 4 talks on storytelling, and I know, okay. Well, now I'm calibrating. Not everyone's raising their hand. How many people about good old-fashioned AI? You know, that thing we had previous to machine learning? Okay, I'm going to talk about these 2 areas. And what I'll do is first discuss computational linguistics and specifically some things about language assistance systems. So all I want to say, I want to talk at a very high level and say that there is such a thing as the very, very general when it comes to linguistics. And that's what we think of. That's not the language level, that's above the language level. What's universal to all languages, for instance. And then there's the very particular, like what are people's individual writing habits? What is Shakespeare's vocabulary? What does Shakespeare have on his desk? You know, which copy of the Metamorphoses did he use? Things like that, okay? These are, so that we have these things when we're thinking about language and literature. And we also have things that are in between, right? And in between we have things like ways to think about languages and dialects, language learning, and I mean some language learning might be on the universal side, but if we're trying to look at the specifics of how a learner of one language who already knows another language, that would sort of be in between. If we're thinking about translation, that would be in between. And actually in all of these areas, we have, since we're thinking about creativity assistance here, and creativity assistance systems, among other things, we have actual language and literary assistance systems, right? My configuration of toolbars in my word processor, my spell checker, which has words that I added that are in my idiolect and they're not in your idiolect. Language modeling and automatic translation between languages. Okay, so you get the idea. And the only reason I bring this up is because I think that in this area, there is coverage of all these things. It's actually done, oh, obviously there's plenty of work left to do. We're not done with it, but this exists. Now let's turn to good old-fashioned AI, which we've already had some discussion of, Tailspin, Universe, systems like this. So the very general, I think sometimes there's broader claims for the very general than we would like. Some things that we say are common sense, like if the concept net would say, for instance, that a cat is a pet, is common sense. But this is not true across cultures. It is not true that everyone in the world, in every culture, believes that a cat is a pet. There are things that are true. Everyone believes that a vessel full of a liquid, if upended above a surface, is going to make it wet. Okay, so naive physics is one of these things. We can buy this. So there is a very general in good old-fashioned AI. And I'd say this, then there is something that's a little more specific, it's sort of in between, which is understanding within culture, scripts and frames. What happens when we go to a restaurant? Do we know, in Roger Schenk's terms, that, you know, John paid the bill when he enjoyed his food and he left a tip? Well, yeah, we know that because of cultural knowledge. We don't know it because it's universal throughout the entire world, but we know it for certain reasons. And then actually, one of the things that's a little quirky about good old-fashioned AI is we have Tailspin, Universe, ELIZA, Joseph Weizenbaum's ELIZA system to sort of enact or parody a Rogerian psychotherapist. These are the very particular things. But they're real oddities. They're very seldom, I mean, we talk about them, but most other people don't, right? And in fact, they're sort of stereotypes. If they had more personality, they might be more successful. But in fact, they're more generic. So those are the types of things I think about related to the way this spectrum from the very general to the very particular sits in good old-fashioned AI. I say it's a spectrum. I'm giving you 3 monoliths like in 2001, but you know, this is a way of getting at this. So now let's finally talk about creativity, which is why we're here, okay? So in creativity and computational and other sorts of creativity, my assertion is that we know that there are very general types of creativity, and we have terms for that. Big C creativity, H creative, Margaret Bowden's term, that there's historical creativity. We came up with something totally new in the world. And novelty, usefulness, and interestingness are often, not exclusively, but they're often applied to mean this type of thing. We also know that there's something very particular. There's the little c. There's the P creativity, personal creativity in Bowden's terms. I thought of something I hadn't thought of before. It's true that Marcel Duchamp already put a urinal in an art exhibit. So when I did that without knowing, it wasn't really that clever of me in a global sense. But still, the fact that I could think of it, you know, that's, I guess you might call it P creativity in a certain way. And this type is sometimes dismissed, that it's, oh, well, that's new to you, that's nifty, that's clever. But if you think about a social environment in which there's different agents that have this type of creativity, you could build something up out of it, possibly, right? So maybe this isn't a bad type of creativity to be exploring. But the thing that I find interesting, and you may notice my color choice here is, I think that good old-fashioned AI didn't really get exactly right the very particular. They were weakest in that. I'd say creativity has been weakest in this in-between level. We've heard some things about blending. We haven't heard about honing, taking a worldview and associating it with contextual cultural views and trying to negotiate within that. But this area in between where we take into account culture and context, and we try to do creativity that's meaningful within culture, and I should note that, I mean, what Marcel Duchamp did was not meaningful to the entire world. It was meaningful to, and it resonated with many, many cultures, but what he did, you know, meant something in the context of Europe and, you know, World War I and so on. That type of area in between, I think, is what we're not attending to very closely. So the reason I see, it's in our terminology that we have no middle C. We have the big C, we have the little c. If we look at Kaufman's popular book, Creativity 101 from last year, right, he gives us a further breakdown that there's 4 levels. There's the big C, the tremendous creative improvement. There's the type of creativities that professionals do, creatives at ad agencies. There's little c, and then there's this sort of everyday mini c type of creativity. But even if we break it into 4 instead of 2, there's still no middle C, right? One of the things I want to suggest is that we think about things other than creative domains, not storytelling, not poetry, not fragrance and flavor, not scientific innovation or design innovation, but that we think about different types of traditions that are culturally, contextually, historically situated. So one of these would be national culture. So how many people believe that national cultures exist? Like that it makes sense to, yes, someone does. Yes, some people, well, I mean, we're not only do we believe it, we're willing to admit it. It'd be hard even if some of us consider ourselves Europeans, or, you know, I'm just North American. It's the same here in Canada as in, you know, I mean, actually, no, not really. It's not true. There's all sorts of ways we attend to the news and we see there are distinctions. If you want to read a very good book about this, I highly recommend Livia Pagliani's Telling the American Story, which is not a jingoistic book about the United States. It is about how an underlying cultural idea of a cultural grammar can be used to understand stories in different cultures. She's telling the American story because that's her culture. She's not telling it because it's the greatest, and, you know, we're cowboys, etc. That's not the point. And she's looking at conversational storytelling, the way people just talk to each other and tell offhand stories. So many people think of this as mini-C, actually. So that's one type of thing. I think we should look within national cultures. I'll say a little bit more about this. But so could we model creativity within national cultures? Could we create a system that would be creative in Finland but not Belgium? A system that would be creative in Canada and not the United States, right? What would that mean? What would the implications be for our research and our studies and our understanding of creativity and culture? What is this person purportedly reading in what looks like a stock photograph on the right-hand side? A book, poetry. Why is it poetry? I'll give you a hint. These are not rectangular. That's lineated. All right. What type of poems? Sonnets. Whose sonnets? Shakespeare's? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, just the material form of this book. We can be detectives here, and we can find out from the material form of this book, the author, specifically the type of genre, specifically the type of form. The reason I bring this up is to show that, well, for one thing, that the sonnet tradition is not only form, it's also material, it's also something reflected in the book. But beyond that, I would say that there are transnational traditions, such as poetic traditions of the sonnet, for instance. And we could do work in the sonnet tradition that isn't about the distinction between Finland and Belgium, that isn't about the distinction between the United States and Canada, but that is about what Elizabeth Bishop and her time in Brazil, what Robert Frost, what Stephanie Strickland in her V wave sonnets, what Jen Bervin in her erasure of Shakespeare sonnets called Nets, where she just took text out to create a book that is a subtraction from Shakespeare sonnets. What do all of these things have in common? They're engaging with the sonnet tradition. John Donne and John Barrymore, all of these people across different languages. Now, it's not about English. The sonnet doesn't originate in English, right? It's in French, and it's in other languages, and it's in Spanish. So this isn't something specific to language or nation, but it is a tradition, and we could investigate the sonnet tradition or other traditions like it. Now, so one question, we think of creativity, and I think we talk of creativity assuming that there is something universal, that we can build a model. I do believe that we can build models of things, such as pouring a glass of water onto a table. Like, that's fine, I buy it. But I think that when we think about creativity, often we're saying that a cat is a pet, or that a bear has 4 legs. Does a bear have 4 legs? I mean, do people think a bear? I mean, I think there are probably some people in the world who think a bear has 2 legs and 2 arms, I would say. I don't know, but I would, it's a guess. All right. So in thinking about this, I want to point to this paper by, I believe, Mapofu et al. In 2006, African Perspectives on Creativity. And this is a survey, this is a study in which they looked at 28 African languages. And the question was, how many of these languages have a word for what we understand in English as creativity? What's your guess? How many of the 28 African languages have a word? Huh? All 28? Yeah. Lower? Higher? Well, we're doing a binary search here. This is what I get for a room of computer scientists. What? Come on. 10, 7, 3, 1. Arabic. 27 African languages do not, that doesn't mean you can't say creativity or you couldn't talk to someone and express it, but they don't encapsulate that in a word the way that we do. I would say that's a pretty good indication that this is not a big universal concept, that there are different nuances and different ideas. Now, one of the things people talked about, and we're just starting to, in this workshop at least, is move from automatic types of evaluation to see if we get human translators to take a look at our work. Now, based on what I've said, I think there's some very interesting implications for bringing in human evaluators. If we got mechanical Turks, or even if we enlisted graduate students who are from different cultures to do our work evaluating our task, is that the right thing to do? If what we are looking for is something that's rooted in culture, do we actually wish to not consider culture when we're trying to evaluate things? Can we somehow factor it out? Can we just let that be, well, they can afford to be on a computer using Mechanical Turk, therefore that's good enough for us, or they can afford to be at our institution, you know, they were able to travel here and get into graduate school, so they're culturally close enough. Or do we need to think about this in a little bit more depth? And then, you know, the follow-up, more general question is, are we actually looking for someone who's competent? Like, are we looking for story competence or literacy in a human evaluator? Are we looking for domain expertise? You are a good storyteller. Livia Poliani says, everyone who can have a conversation is a good storyteller in the context of conversations. We can all tell conversational stories. We do it all the time. She went and collected data from all sorts of ordinary people who do not identify themselves as storytellers to show this. Everybody can tell stories. We all have this competence. But is that what we're looking for, or are we looking for a cultural grounding and cultural awareness? All right. So this is my challenge for people who are looking to develop not just creativity assistance, which was one of the themes here of the workshop today, but also any type of system that produces creative output. I would say let's look in between the super general and the super personal. Let's look at this cultural level that's in between. And instead of thinking about creative domains, which is a term used in the workshop call, and it's a very common type of thought, we don't say that people like Petrarch and John Donne and William Shakespeare and Elizabeth Bishop are domain experts. That's not a term we use for great writers of sonnets. We would use terms like master, which is, I could talk a little bit about the problematic nature of that term that has something to do with domination, colonialism, and so on. But if you hook up your hard drive and you think about what the other hard drive is, that's not the master. You can deal with that in your own mind for a little bit if you like. But mastery is an idea that is maybe an alternative, at least, to creative domains. It could help us get away from that. To say that we really want people who are masters of a sonnet. We want people who are masters of a national culture. Those who, like, we would look at people in Canada, poets like Margaret Atwood, Christian Book, Leonard Cohen, right? And with those, that's how we would try to constitute, what things were. And they're not. It's not that they're domain experts, right? So. So this is how I think we could start doing the work of producing and assisting creativity, right, in ways that are actually sensitive to and specific to national cultures or transnational poetic traditions. So I'm not saying that national culture is the only thing. I'm not here as a creativity nationalist. I'm saying that it's one way to slice things up. It is a meaningful way to slice things up to do research. But for instance, if we can't understand even the people who are emblematic of national cultures, how could we understand Roberto Bolaño, born in Chile, forced out after the coup, came to Mexico, not really identified as a Mexican ever, but all of his writing, his work, his literary output dwells obsessively on his time in Mexico. Went to Barcelona, to Spain, and died there, and wrote his most influential novels. So how can we understand the transnational people if we don't understand anything about the national cultures? So these are the reasons I think we need to look at these creative middle grounds, so that we can go back out. Because, of course, Bolaño isn't in the middle. Bolaño's over with Shakespeare's desk, and with our spell checkers. He's with the very specific. But unless we understand the cultural, we don't understand the relation between. individuals and their culture. Unless we understand how the culture is different from the general, we don't really know what's truly general. We think that a cat is a pet somehow is the same thing as spilling liquid makes things wet, right? So until we investigate these things, we don't really know as well as we could. So I'd say let's not just, for instance, I'm not saying like let's make a joke that people from one country find. I mean, this is a good exercise. I suggest it at conferences, but let's not make a joke that just people from one country or one nation find is funny and people from another country don't. That's not the end. That's not my end goal here. Okay. I'm not saying let's make good sonnets. Let's create good sonnets or good haiku, right? Which is another transnational tradition. I mean, sorry, people from Japan, but it's been done in the West a huge amount. And in fact, most computer-generated haiku is in English. But let's not just do those things. Let's try to build creative national traditions, right? So the work of, so I would say like here, just the tiny step, Tony Veal working on simile generation and coming up with a new simile through searching the web, looking at ideas, and putting together something that actually isn't warranted in the corpus of the web, the simile as cold as a robot fish. That's pretty good. That's the type of simile that makes one person laugh. That's my favorite type. As cold as a robot fish. Why does it work? Because you can be as cold as a fish. That's an idiom. Robots are cold. They're cool. And a robot fish exists. We have them at MIT in the tow tank. We test out robot fish and see how they... So you put all of these things together, and it's actually not a national joke. It's a geek joke. I mean, it's a computer scientist and mechanical engineering joke, right? And so that's the type of thing where we're now actually building creative traditions, in a new way. And if we can develop the tradition, I mean, probably easier to develop the tradition of the simile than the tradition of the sonnet. But if we're going to make sonnets and make haiku, let's not limit ourselves to making clever sonnets and clever haiku. Let's try to further what a haiku is, or what a sonnet is, what it means to us culturally. Well, any questions?